Um, right. So we are recording this, so it's going to be available later. Since you registered, you and all the other folks who registered are going to get a link and can watch it later and can share it with everybody. If you like, introduce yourself in chat. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from. Um, During the program, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can after we finish the presentations. And again, remember that we're going to send you information afterwards. Not only will you be able to see the program, but we'll give you some links to documents and things that'll be of use to you. So, a little bit of an advertisement for Wild Virginia, just in case you're not really familiar with us. We have a couple main programs, our connectivity program, which my colleague Trapper there is leads, and the water quality program, which involves a range of things, chemicals like PFAS, but also damages from things like pipeline and other development projects. We have something we call our Clean Water Advocates program, where we teach people how to go out there and fight for their own waters and to know how to negotiate these processes. Finally, we have a range of educational programs like this one and quite a few others. So you need to follow us so you can keep up with all these programs, know how to find what we're doing, and hopefully join in and support us. We really depend on folks to be there, not just donations, but just so that we can tell decision makers, hey, we've got a lot of folks behind us. They care about these things too. And just a little preview, we've got, as I say, lots of programs, but one that I'm really excited about is coming up on March 26th. Brian Richter, who is an international expert on water, is going to talk to us in honor of World Water Day. So be sure not to miss that. So we're here to talk about Wild Virginia's involvement in the Virginia General Assembly. Um, we First of all, we focus within the programs that we lead. We're a small organization, so we had to be selective about what we can lead on. And so within the water quality program or the connectivity area, we look for opportunities where we can be really useful in the legislature to push for things that we care about and sometimes to oppose things that are dangerous. Um, so sometimes we come up with these bills or ideas for bills on our own from our work throughout the year. Sometimes we're part or we are part of coalitions throughout the year for both of our programs where we kind of trade ideas. We also try to meet ahead of time with legislators to see where they are and to let them know about what our priorities are. And then things come out of nowhere. Sometimes you get into session and all of a sudden there are bills that you had no idea you were going to have to deal with. And again, sometimes you want to support them, sometimes you have to oppose them. Um, but as I say, we do work on these things throughout the year. We don't wait until January when the legislature comes into session. We're looking at these things throughout the year, and one great resource to look at policy priorities for the conservation community is this document called Our Common Agenda, which is produced by the Virginia Conservation Network. But really, it's built by the 160 plus members of the Conservation Network. We help write some of the policy papers in there. Now, they're not specifically bills or specifically language that we're going to carry forward, but they do provide a framework. They do provide specific ideas that can be built on once we get to the legislature. Um, this year, well, first of all, the Virginia Conservation Network, VCN, that big coalition of folks gets together on a regular basis leading up to and all during the legislative session. and reviews things that member groups might want to support or oppose, and very often comes to positions on those. Those positions are useful not only because we know who's on our side in specific instances, but also the group can speak as a collective voice. And the things that the Conservation Network opposes or supports are that's distributed to everybody, to the legislators and far and wide. So people know what we're where we stand. Um, you see there, I'm not going to read off all the categories, but again, we look at a very wide range of bills. Um, Now, where we are, it's kind of an opportune time to talk about the legislative update because we're in the middle of the session. Yesterday, I think it was called Crossover Day. What happens is bills that start in the House or the Senate, they've now finished in those houses. If they passed in the House, it's going to go over now to the Senate, and the same for Senate bills. If they failed in their respective houses, then they are no more for this season. But we looked, or the VCN folks looked at bills that the group has been following or had a position on this year. And you can see there that last um, set of bars on the left side that we've been following 483 bills. That's a lot. We've actually taken positions on 220 of those. And at this point in the session, we're doing really well with success for what, the bills that we wanted to go forward or not. 127 of the bills that we have supported have gone forward. Um, Essentially, all the ones that we opposed that have come to a conclusion, we've been successful. So I'm going to talk about some of the very specific bills that Wild Virginia has been leading on. And again, that's through a process where we meet with our allies and we say, okay, I'm going to take the lead on this one and make sure that we get people to the committee room, that we get people lobbying their legislators. And of course, other people join in and provide support for that. But we always try to be the leader on some of the things that we know most about and care most about. One of the things, of course, that Wild Virginia has worked on for years now is pipelines, natural gas pipelines. And one bill this time from Delegate Razul, totally common sense and necessary bill, which is to make sure that these natural gas pipelines are safe, that they're inspected the way they're supposed to be, and that they're maintained. And so this bill was designed or is designed to have the State Corporation Commission develop some regulations that essentially make sure the really good methods of leak detection are in place. Now, this only applies to intrastate natural gas distribution facilities, not interstate. The legal reason for that is the interstate pipelines are regulated by the federal government, and the state can't take primacy on those. Anyhow, it's a great common sense bill. In this case, it's gotten really wide support. In fact, the conservation groups have stood beside the natural gas industry in this case. And so in the House of Delegates, it passed through unanimously, not a hitch in the committees or on the floor of the House. It has now been referred to the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee, and we've already started working on that, letting those folks know where we stand and that we're going to be there to support this. And if you follow us, which I hope you do, you'll be hearing more about that when it gets to the stage where people can weigh in, uh, again, through a committee hearing or through a specific mechanism. We'll let you know. But we're really, really hopeful for this one, and it's really important. Another part of our program, Wild Virginia's program dealing with water, has to do with PFAS or forever chemicals. And if you're not familiar with those, I won't go into great depth, but there are thousands of forms of chemical that are really dangerous. And we know that they've spread farther and farther in our environment. They're in surface waters, groundwater, in animals, in our own bodies. And we need to confront those threats. One way to confront those is to realize that folks who have residential wells as their water supply may have contamination from these chemicals. In fact, there have been recent studies that showed that many wells are almost certain to have PFAS. Um, so Delegate McLaughlin, now for the second year, has patroned this bill, in this case, HB 348, that would essentially provide a framework for testing of those wells, um, and some regulatory structure, but also to give well owners, landowners, some help in doing the testing and even treating their water if there's contamination. It would create a fund and then give grants to folks who need that help. And those are folks where you've already found that the levels of these chemicals exceed the drinking water, the recommended drinking water levels. So we think that it made a lot of sense. We lobbied really hard for it. And in fact, in the Agriculture Chesapeake Natural Resources Committee, it flew through with a unanimous support. But then we got to the money folks, the Appropriations Committee, and unfortunately, it was not passed out of that committee. The polite term they use is that it was laid on the table. You can just say that it was killed, unfortunately. The other unfortunate thing is we didn't really get an explanation as to why that committee decided that this bill would not go forward. But we won't give up on it. If we have to come back a third year, we'll certainly do that. Um, anyway, those are the two bills that Wild Virginia, in our role um, through our water program, took the lead on, and we're able to kind of marshal the forces out there to do I think, a pretty thorough job of addressing them. I did want to say that there are some other bills, and I can't go into detail about all these, but PFAS has become one of kind of the leading issues on as amongst the water advocates in the General Assembly, really now for the third year in a row. And one place where that's really vital is that wastewater treatment plants, these are municipal sewage plants, where these chemicals are going through the plant, they also end up in what's called sewage sludge or biosolids. That's the solid material that is produced when they treat the wastewater. And in many cases, that sludge or those biosolids are spread on farmlands. Now, again, we know that many of those things are contaminated, and it's really important that we figure out where it's going and that we control it. The good thing is that there are companion bills in the House and Senate, that first bullet there, that are still alive, and they would require a certain level of testing and some limitations where certain sludge cannot be spread on the land if it has high levels. So that's a really important issue. We're working pretty much constantly with our allies to try to push those controls also. And I think it's just always, people are always asking us, and it's a huge issue now, is the data centers. If you don't know, Virginia is now the world leader in data centers. These huge facilities use lots of energy, they use lots of water, they consume a lot of land, and have just a wide range of environmental cost. One of the things that really fits into my area of interest is the fact that they do use tons of water for cooling in these facilities. And unfortunately, um, when localities are providing that water, sometimes we haven't been able to know uh, how much water is used or where it's going. And this bill, the Water Transparency Bill, that's still alive is SB 553. And again, that's very important. If somebody's using lots of water, that's important for our planning going forward, to know where it's going and what's happening with it. So that was my very quick kind of summary of both of the things that we're working on and a few of the highlights that we're concerned with. Now I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Trapper.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Hopefully you can see my slides okay. Dave, give me a thumbs up. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Trapper Fowler, your Habitat Connectivity Program Director here at Wild Virginia, and we're going to focus on a few bills as well. So I'll get started. These are the bills that, Wild Virginia, myself, with support of others, have certainly been following more directly and engaging on. So you have HB 597, which is the Wildlife Corridor Grant Fund. And then there's also a couple of what we're calling the NEPA bills, which I'll get into as well. So um, I think Dave mentioned this, but the verbiage there, the HB stands for House Bill and the SB stands for Senate Bill. Some bills start off in just one house, like case in point, HB 597. It did not have a Senate companion bill, whereas if you look at the NEPA bill example, both of those started in the respective chambers, and now they've crossed over. So I just wanted to point that out. Um, I'll say, just as Dave did, fortunately, we have a ton of great partners working alongside of us because, as he, threw out there, that we don't have the time and the bandwidth to be able to focus on all of them. But that's not to say there's not a lot of other really, really great bills that are introduced and still active to this day and time. Um, I want to mention that a good way to track bills is the VCN, the Virginia Conservation Network Bill Tracker, and I'll show a screenshot of that towards the end of my presentation. There's other ways to track bills, but VCN is probably one of the best and the most user friendly, I'll say. You can set up notifications through LIS and track up to 5 free bills, or track up to 5 bills with their free version, but I honestly think VCN is probably the best resource. So just wanted to mention that, and we can follow up with some of those links to help get you there too if you're not familiar. The bill I really want to focus on tonight, this one is still active. It has crossed over into the Senate. Um, is the Wildlife Corridor Grant Fund, HB 597. We got to give a big thanks to Delegate Simons for her leadership and support on this. She was our chief patron. She was wonderful to work with and still working with her. But we also got to recognize the co-sponsors, including Delegate Fowler, no relationship there, but also a great guy, Delegate Gardner, Carr, and Delegate Anderson. They were all wonderful to work with and very supportive, and why this bill has made it as far as it has. Um, so this bill, this illustration really shows it well. There's this will essentially create a basket or a bucket or an account, however you'd like to look at it. Depicted here as a bowl, but it's creating this fund or account, and it will hold money, hold funds from two voluntary donation mechanisms. One being electronic Department of Motor Vehicle transactions, and then the other being voluntary donations through income tax filings. And that's it. That's how this fund gets built. That's how it gets seeded. And then in turn, this fund will be used to um, give out grants for work that has to do with the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. So this will greatly support it and actually make it actionable. The Wildlife Corridor Action Plan is wonderful and it's a great plan, but it without sustainable funding, it will stay just a plan. So we have to have a way to make it actionable. We have to find a way to sustainably fund these projects that are prioritized in this Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. So this Wildlife Corridor Grant Fund is a great step in the right direction into making this more actionable for the Commonwealth. Um, this will not only pay for things like wildlife crossings or say wildlife fencing to tie it into our existing infrastructure, or even, that goes for overpasses, underpasses, all crossing structures. Um, it will also pay for things like feasibility studies that will help the agencies and localities decide where wildlife crossings or fencings make the most sense, and have the most benefit to make our roads safer for wildlife and motorists. This will also It could pay for monitoring, research and monitoring to further study sites, or what species is crossing this particular road in this particular habitat. So this grant fund will pay for a lot of things, is what I'm getting at here as it relates to wildlife corridors, preservation or reconnecting corridors, and or the implementation of wildlife crossings. I must mention that the fund is non-reverting, which means, every year this fund will not get emptied out and go elsewhere if it's not spent. So it will stay in that account, um, and it'll just continue to build if it's not spent out. And most importantly, there was a lot of concern as we were introducing this bill about whether, it would require state funds. And in fact, the way it's set with these two voluntary donation mechanism, it requires no state funds. So that's been a lot of the key to success with this bill as well thus far. And fingers crossed it continues. I just want to show how we are really confident that this bill will work should it be approved by the Senate. So in Virginia, we have two examples of DMV transactions. The donations that stem from it already being successful for other great causes. You can see the numbers here that span from almost $1 million raised in 2021 all the way to 2025. A little bit less money, but still, showing that people are actively donating through these DMV transactions already. And then also the other funding mechanism is the income tax filings. And again, another example of how folks in the Commonwealth are already choosing to do this when they file their tax returns. And it spans from the years 2017 all the way up to 2023, still raising quite significant amounts of money. So we are hopeful that this would in turn do the same for wildlife crossings and corridor work. These are examples on this next slide from other states. And these are a little bit different, but still great examples because in Maryland and Wyoming, folks are actually choosing to voluntarily donate just for the sole purpose of wildlife crossings and corridor and connectivity work, which is also a great talking point, right? So Maryland, um, they just started a vehicle registration donation mechanism towards crossings and corridor work this past summer, back in June, and they've already raised $85,000. So really good example there. In Wyoming, they have a license plate opportunity where people can buy this particular license plate, and it supports wildlife crossings work. They also have some mechanisms where when you go renew or get your um, hunting and fishing license, you can also donate towards wildlife crossings, which will support, fencing and corridor work as well. So really good examples from other states where people are choosing to donate specifically for the purpose of wildlife crossings and corridor work. And then again, on that previous slide in Virginia, great examples of how people are already using the proposed funding mechanisms existing in Virginia to donate towards other great causes. So we think the two will work really well for HB 597. Um, so just kind of showing you a visual of where this bill was, where it is now. I'll be honest, I did not update the slide today as I should have, but we did just learn today that it has been assigned the Senate Committee on Finance and Appropriations. So you could actually update that right hand box there. But this thing started back in a subcommittee in the House, and then moved its way up to the full committee. And that's where we spent a lot of time and effort, just like we are going to spend a lot of time and effort trying to talk to these senators on this committee. And that's a really, really good note to take if you want to get engaged and get involved. Look up the Senate Committee on Finance and Appropriations, and if that happens to be your senator, that is really really powerful. They tend to really listen and make time for their constituents. So, we can put a link or follow up when we send out information after the webinar. But if you want to engage on HB 597, the Wildlife Corridor Grant Fund, and you recognize the name there on that committee as being your representative, we sure could use your help in just asking them for their support. And it's a really easy talking point. We just want to make roads safer for everyone, including wildlife. A reminder that Virginia is a top 10 risk state um, in the nation for wildlife vehicle collisions. So we need to make our roads safe for multiple reasons. These are a couple other bills that we were engaged in. These are the ones I was calling the NEPA bills. So, there was a House version 411, and then there was a Senate version 716, and now they've crossed over into the other respective houses. But essentially, this bill will give the Virginia Department of Transportation, they will assume some federal NEPA responsibilities via agreements with the U.S. Department of Transportation. And just in case you're not familiar, NEPA stands for National Environmental Protection Act. We see this as an opportunity for more public engagement, assurances that there are tailored protections for specific projects and species of concerns, both fish and wildlife, even plants, um, and a means for the state to fill gaps in the review process currently lost under the federal review. There's quite a few serious and scary amendments that are proposed right now under the current federal administration to weaken or water down NEPA, and that's not good. We are concerned about that. NEPA, as far as I know, went for almost 30 years without an amendment, and now there's quite a few that threaten its integrity. And I'll just briefly talk about these. One is an amendment that has to do with electronic permitting, and it would propose using AI to review the public comment to expedite the review process. And then there's also what they're calling the Speed Act that would constrain considerations by the agencies, likely weaken the review process again, and allow for projects to move forward even if the NEPA review is unsatisfactory. And that's scary. of what could be lost, what could be impacted if these amendments were approved at the federal level. So these two bills would essentially give the state more oversight of NEPA reviews in specific scenarios. Um, these two bills would also mandate an environmental review manual. I said that wrong. These two bills would mandate an environmental manual review update requirement at the state level for Virginia Department of Transportation. That's a good thing because that will allow for some public input. That's a good thing because we see it as an opportunity to maybe talk about more considerations for things like aquatic organism passage projects, more opportunities for things like wildlife crossings. There's some other states where this is working really well for, slipping in um, these corridor and connectivity crossing projects very, very early on in the planning process. Um, and these projects are being implemented. So we see these as opportunities. And of course, where these opportunities are feasible and implemented, then we end up with safer roads and even better water quality. Um, I'll note that these bills currently have a proposed 5-year sunset. So, if it's not working great and we don't like it, it could potentially go away in 5 years, could be reassessed. So that's a good thing. Um, but all in all, these two bills, HB 411 and SB 716, aim to streamline the permitting process, which can cause some concerns. But right now, given the federal oversight issues and harmful amendments proposed, these bills provide for more transparency, more public input, and more opportunity. So just wanted to note that. This is just a slide I pulled. Just reminding folks that NEPA is as described here by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, stating how critical it is in protecting fish, wildlife, plants, and the public from toxic harm, industrial pollution, and it allows for the public to be involved in the federal decision making process. So NEPA is a good thing as long as the integrity is maintained. These are a couple budget amendments, and I'll try not to get too in the weeds on these, but I think they're worth mentioning. Um, so these would support and help alleviate the Department of Wildlife Resources budgetary constraints to support their work. These DWR is a big partner of ours. They're really, really important in our work with wildlife crossings and corridor efforts. So we want to make sure that they have the funds that they need so that they can continue to do great work and we can work alongside them. Um, if no action is taken, DWR will be forced to continue to reduce services, personnel, and investments in deferred maintenance and public lands access, ultimately compromising their ability to carry out their core mission to protect Virginia's wildlife and habitat and promote more outdoor recreation. They're facing these budget pressures from declining hunting and fishing license sales. They depend on those and the rising cost of state technology costs, employee salaries, and benefits. All those costs are going up, and they rely on things that are fading out, are not consistent as they used to be, like hunting license sales and fishing license sales. Um, just a little bit more background. Um, these budget amendments are essentially temporary solutions to help support the agency, and I'm going to talk about the long-term solutions here in just a second. But just as a reminder, DWR is a non-general fund agency, meaning that it receives minimal appropriations from the general fund through the state budget. Over 69% of their revenue comes from the sales of those hunting and fishing licenses, permits, 43% from registrations, and 26% from federal grants. The remaining revenues come from two sources of transfer funds established in the Virginia statute. A portion of the sales collected on outdoor equipment for hunting, fishing, and wildlife watching, which is referred to as HB 38 funds, and revenues collected through watercraft sales and use tax. And I'm going to talk about both of those two right now. Um, DWR funds from hunting and fishing and wildlife watching sales tax, or those HB 38 funds, it's out of date and it hasn't been adjusted with inflation. They're not receiving the amount of money required and is based on a set cap from 1998 for their revenue. So it's way out of date. Um, the cap is supposed to be adjusted every 5 years and it has not. So the long-term solution, long-term fix and ask is to support DWR's budget request to increase that original 1998 cap from a long time ago, which is 13 million, up to today's money. And it's even short of that, I believe, at 19 million. Um, this new cap is based on average in the last six reports of the estimated expenditures from the National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation. So again, just asking them to keep up with the times and to give them what they are supposed to be getting from these sales. The watercraft sales tax, the governor has the ability to transfer excess funds to DWR, but the agency has not received these optional transfers of excess revenues at the discretion of the governor. They've only received it once in the last 12 years. So that's not really working either. And the long-term fix there is to ask the General Assembly to amend the budget language to where it's an automatic transfer and not at just, the discretion of the governor. Any revenues collected through the watercraft sales and use tax. And these funds get used for things like maintaining canoe and kayak access, anything to do with water and watercraft access. And again, if DWR has to divert funding from other programs and priorities, excuse me, to sustain mission critical activities and current staffing levels, then things get lost and things will suffer. Um, and they'll have to make staffing cuts and further reduce the level of service they provide all of us. So I'm passionate about this issue as I am a former state wildlife agency employee of over 9 years in both the states of North Carolina and South Carolina. So I hear these concerns, and we need to advocate for these folks to get the funding that they deserve so they can continue to do the great work that they do. Lastly, this is just a screenshot of that VCN, Virginia Conservation Network, which, like Dave said, we're a part of. This is a large collaborative, a bunch of organizations. Um, this is that bill tracker, and I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So you can actually go in there. They keep this thing very updated. Um, I mean, somebody's on this all the time, updating it. I don't know how often, but it's pretty often. Um, and you can click on the bill. You can click on why VCN has chosen to support it, and it'll have talking points. So it's really easy. Like before you go and contact the legislator, you can actually reference this and use it to communicate as to why this particular legislator should support the issue. and vote to approve. But again, there's a lot of bills on here, and this is just a snapshot of just a few. But I do want to mention that there's some really important invasive species bills on here that I didn't have time to cover, and maybe we can follow up with. Of course, invasive species having a huge impact on our native wildlife and plants. Um, and they cost the state so much money to try to control. And the best solution is just to never allow them to get established. And that's what some of these bills aim to do. And with that, I think we just want to say thank you for your attention. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will take questions, and I believe Julian's going to help field those. Julian's one of our interns from UVA this semester, who's doing an exceptional job. But there's a couple links there. But again, don't stress over those because we can follow up with them as well. But at that time, we'll turn it over to Julian.
Great. Yeah, we have one question in the chat from Alexander Valenzuela. He lives in District 39, and then Senator Eben was a member of the Finance and Appropriations Committee. Yesterday was his last day. He was wondering, um, would the new senator that's replacing them, Senator Bennett, also be a member of the Finance and Appropriation Committee, um, because they're replacing him in that same district?
Might have just learned the answer to this today because I emailed, is it Parker Bennett? Um, and I was told that they do not automatically roll into that subcommittee. So great question.
Yeah, that the leadership in each house basically has the power to designate the committee members. So um, I'm going to give you guys. Oh, here is another question for Julian.
Yeah, from Natasha Pinal. Is there a need to partner with a PR firm to elevate and distribute the messaging that we have, Well, Virginia?
I, you know, paying a PR firm, if that were the choice, we probably could use it, but we probably wouldn't have the resources to do it. But we depend on a lot of folks to help amplify our message, and really the members and the supporters out there do an amazing job of that. And so appreciate the idea. Um, some donated time from a PR firm would be, I'm sure, greatly valued. Um, I'm glad you introduced Julian Trapper. I forgot to introduce Julian and Kylie, who are both here to try to keep us straight. So I wanted to make sure that they got noticed. And don't be shy, folks. Add into the Q&A there. But I wanted to just amplify something that Trapper was saying about the NEPA, the need for state legislation or state authorities while we're potentially or definitely losing certain protections under the federal government. That's not just in relation to NEPA either. It's in relation to the Clean Water Act and a whole slew of other federal laws that we've come to depend on. And that's why it's even more important to be good advocates and to fight for these things on the state level because the state does have pretty wide latitude, even wider than the federal government, just inherently to do these things. So it's really important. And in fact, while Virginia has been part of a couple of lawsuits to try to defend the NEPA procedures through the last couple of years, so we know how important that is. And I'll let you get that other question, Julian.
Yep. From Pete, HB 597 feels like it should be a bipartisan bill. Do you have any insights as to why all the Republicans in the House voted against it?
So Couple things there. Excellent question. And Dave has felt this a little bit too with one of his bills, with folks voting just along their party lines, and for no particular reason. But I will say with HB 597, we did see some of that in the subcommittee and the committee, but in the House, in the full House, we actually saw three Republicans vote in favor of HB 597. And we actually had a co-sponsor, Delegate Fowler, again, no relation, but great fella. He's also a Republican, and he chose to co-sponsor this bill. So it's not all Republicans. And in Dave's case, it's not all Democrats that are necessarily voting against a bill, but it just happens that way sometimes. It's part of what they do for whatever reasons that don't make sense to me as a wildlife biologist. But all that to say, it is frustrating sometimes when that does seem to occur, but we are very hopeful that for particularly HB 597 that we will have bipartisan support. Um, but because I mean, if you look at the federal reauthorization bill for the wildlife crossings pilot program, so that's a federal program. It's a federal grant where states, tribes, and localities can apply for money towards feasibility studies, towards wildlife crossing infrastructure. Um, in fact, Virginia received around 600,000 back in 2023 from that same opportunity, same federal grant. Um, there's bipartisan um, sponsors for that reauthorization right now. So folks are working together on wildlife vehicle collision mitigation measures. It is, road safety is something that matters to all of us. We all travel the road as a necessity, and we all care about wildlife, regardless of your political affiliation. So just throw that out there. And while I got the mic for a second, I figured I'd show this. I picked this up in the state house. Hopefully you can see it. Not really, but there you go. It's a really small red book. It's called the Red Book, and this is the second edition. But it's super useful if you find yourself at the State House. You can flip through here, and it has the legislators' faces, so you can actually recognize who it is when you talk to them, or if you see them in the hallway. What's been very useful to me is you can find their room number printed right here, and you don't have to Google it on your phone as you're moving up and down, what is it, 13 floors or so, 14 floors. It's a big building, and it can be a little overwhelming, but if you have this little handy red book guide that you can pick up for free at the front desk there as soon as you walk through security, this seems to make things a little easier for me to navigate. So just wanted to throw that out there as a resource.
And that's a good segue to mention Conservation Lobby Day, which I don't know if we talked about yet, but BCN sponsors every year Conservation Lobby Day, where hundreds of people show up, and whether they're experienced at lobbying or not, you can get help, you can get assistance in getting appointments to see your legislators, and you can learn from other folks who have more experience at doing it. And so that's something, if this intrigues you, if you're interested in next year, make sure to look out for that. And again, follow us and we'll let you know those things are going on. I also wanted to point out, if you didn't see it, that I put in the chat the link where you can find out who your legislators are. So you go in there, you give them your address, And you find out not only your two state legislators, the House and the Senate, but your federal folks also. So that's pretty valuable. Um, one thing I'm going to hit you with a question, Trevor, and I know that I've heard these numbers fly around, but the I think when we're talking about spending money to try to deal with the problems with connectivity and wildlife corridors, I mean, you know, any of this gets into big money, but talk a little bit about how big the money is, the cost of not doing this. I think that's really important for people to think about.
Well, that's a great question. And before I get into it, I just put a link in the chat for the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee. So you can look to see after you follow Dave's link and find out who your legislator is. If you look at your senator and then you cross-reference that with who's on this Finance and Appropriations Committee and you recognize them and you want to fight and approve for support, I'll say fight. You want to fight for 597. I like that term. Um, you can find out if they're on that committee, and like I said, that's super helpful. As far as cost goes, yeah, I mean wildlife vehicle collisions are super expensive. Um, uh, Virginia Department of Transportation's research division, they have scientific literature out there. So I'm not just pulling these numbers from the air, but I've referenced them so many times already that they're embedded in my brain forever. If an average deer vehicle collision will cost the Commonwealth around $41,000. And just sit on that for a minute. I mean, that's a lot of money. And it's not that that amount of money pays for the needed car repairs or the needed cost to get emergency personnel out there to service the accident. That's not the hospital bill. That's all of it. So it's an average of all of those different things for the multitude of um, deer vehicle collisions we have in this state. The cost, if you live in the southwest part of the state, where we have the elk herd, um, a collision with an elk is even more. It's around 81,000. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, um, it's costing these collectively are costing Virginia $533 million a year, I believe. So we again we're number 10 in the nation for wildlife vehicle collision risk. So we're way up there, and actually, our neighboring state of West Virginia is number one, I think. So, some of that's bleeding over into Virginia proper, um, and you got to think too that we're basing all of this on what's reported. So that's only the collisions and accidents that are going reported in police data. And that's only for large animals like elk and deer and bear. I mean, there's people that are swerving and getting into wrecks, damaging their vehicles, maybe getting injured when they swerve for something else too, like a raccoon or a possum or whatever, a coyote, um, a box turtle. So it's all relative. But just to say that it's very, very expensive. It's very, very scary if you've ever been in that situation, and it happens in a flash. And it is preventable. And it's preventable through wildlife crossings. It's preventable through preserving the known wildlife travel corridors that we already have, and trying to reconnect the ones that we have fragmented with things like roads or, in the case of aquatic species, undersized culverts.
You answered my question beautifully. One of the things I just wanted to, we're near the end of the hour, but again, we pointed out several bills here that are still alive. Trapper's bill, really important. The pipeline bill, and I will raise again those the bills having to do with biosolids and sewage sludge. Although we have not, while Virginia has not been the named leader on those are incredibly important. And almost any county that you live in, you may well be facing spreading of those materials in your area. And so we'll keep you updated on that. And Julian, got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. We mentioned that HB 348 passed like agriculture unanimously, but then got laid on the table in appropriations. Is
Yeah.
there anything specifically that caused that? And then I'm wondering like what we could do in the future to, like change the funding or, like just a strategy to move it forward better if we continued it on to further like sessions.
Well, we're thinking hard about that, whether there's any strategy. I will tell you that last year, and again, essentially the same bill, faced the same fate last year. And this time, this did include an appropriations for a lesser amount. So we figured that that had a better chance of going forward. Um, it- but again, we didn't get an explanation from the folks who voted to lay this one aside. So it's going to be, this is one of those things, like I say, during the year, we do our best to be in touch with these folks, and we'll certainly be talking to Delegate McLaughlin and some of the others to see, how can we push this forward. And I think we can always do a better job of publicly, in the meantime, through the media, through public education, letting them know what, how big these threats are. So, but that's a good question, and that's something we need to work on is figure out what happened and how can we fix it. So, well, we're at 7:59, unless somebody has a final word here. I think we're about ready to wrap up. And we again thank everybody for being here. Follow us. Make sure you're paying attention to our emails. We'll give you email blast to say, hey, it's time. Let these folks know what you think on this particular issue. And that is so valuable because they listen to us, but they listen to their specific constituents even better. So keep that in mind. And with that, I think we can say good night. So thanks.
Thanks, y'all.